collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, we'll discuss the multiple paths to reconciliation.
Do we want to live with a simmering tension, with a poison inside the conflict, or the poison of the conflict inside the country?
Hear about a new children's book that aims to help kids deal with cancer.
Mary is a little girl, and she has a white pin in her head, and that's a symbolic language in the story, saying that Mary, she has brain cancer, brain tumor.
And how the EU Commission is promoting social enterprises.
The legal form is important, but the target of the company is important. And if we see that the company is really focusing on social impact for us, this is an important element.
Last Thursday at the CVAR in Old Nicosia, Dr. Kristalla Yakinthug spoke about when not all roads lead to home, the multiple routes to reconciliation. She joins us to tell us about that work and indeed the other work she's done in other countries on conflict transformation. That's a new word for me. I always thought that we called it conflict resolution.
It's a new field. It's not just a new word for you, but for all of us. Conflict transformation is essentially the evolution of conflict resolution, really. But
so does it only apply to countries or groups where a conflict has been ongoing for some time?
Yeah, it's essentially about not just resolving conflict, but transforming relationships between conflict parties and conflict groups. So the reason that the term has changed and the field is evolving is because it's trying to get to this idea of a broader understanding of how do you, over a long period of time, transform these multiple conflictual relationships
that have been ingrained in many cases over generations.
Exactly. And how do you keep, because to some extent conflict is healthy, but how do you stop it from becoming violent conflict? So how do you transform it?
And in the case of Cyprus, you've done extensive work, I know, on the island's problem. It's not that it's violent. Mm-hmm. In a sense, as Espen Barth-Eide keeps saying, it's one of the most peaceful conflicts mm-hmm. in the world at the moment. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that there's a different approach?
There was an excellent term used by a wonderful Cypriot scholar, Kostas Konstantino, and he calls Cyprus a post-violent conflict, which I think captures what it is really nicely, because what is deceptive about Cyprus is that it's no longer violent. Yes, it's a peaceful conflict on the surface, but traumas and grudges and resentments and loss, all of this lives beneath the surface.
And we still do get an occasional
football fan attacking cars,
yes,
for example. Yes,
very recently. I mean, Turkish Cypriots come to the south and get their cars smashed up. Yep. Or people go to the north and they feel very uncomfortable because maybe they feel threatened by a group. So it's very much just under the surface, isn't it?
Yes, which also makes it dangerous because for two reasons. First, there's a danger in forgetting because it looks peaceful, so therefore it also looks safe. And if it looks safe, then we don't need to think about what lies under the surface. And second, it's deceptive because it's not peaceful. We do have these things that you talk about that exist, the uncomfortability, the violence that erupts in isolated events or what looks like isolated events. If this lives this close to the surface, there's a question of what happens if there are sparks, and also, do we want to live like this as people in this country? Do we want to live with a simmering tension, with a poison inside the conflict, or the poison of the conflict inside the country?
The problem is that there's no sort of hard and fast rule as to how you can overcome that. I mean, your talk was on when not all roads lead to home. Mm-hmm. I'd suggest to you that in Cyprus, the vast majority of the population aren't actually sure at the moment what home is.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I agree with you absolutely that there isn't and there shouldn't be one hard and fast rule for any conflict. And I have seen, as a practitioner, time and time again, such terrible mistakes being made when international organisations, some of which I work with, think that there's a package solution from one conflict to another that can be slightly tweaked and can be absorbed by a local population, inverted commas.
And that's happened here because we've had people from South Africa, people from Ireland on a regular basis over the last decade at least, saying, well, this is how we did it.
Yeah. And there is value in learning lessons, but I would suggest that we ask two important questions when these people come. What did you do that felt right? And what did you do that felt wrong? What would you do again if you had the chance? What would you do again differently? Because that's where you learn from other contexts. What did they screw up?
But then if we come back again to Cyprus, who should we ask about what feels right and what feels wrong?
First, we have to have a discussion inside the country. And you talked about Cyprus at the moment being on a kind of precipice, being at this cross-section again, or this crossroads again. And I think it's true. I think that we really need to start having conversations about what do we want our future to look like.
So we need to decide where home is and what it is before we can even look at a route to get there.
You start with what you need and what you want, and you work out from there. That is the only prescription that works.
And it does seem that if you look at past polls, referenda and so on, that in both communities there is, I won't say a 50-50 divide, but it's a fairly close divide, that half do want a solution and a very large proportion still don't.
That's true.
How do you overcome that?
I think that we haven't yet had, at least in the Greek Cypriot community, difficult conversations about what we're afraid of. And we haven't had a real dialogue between people who do want peace and people who don't want this thing that we call peace in this version. Because I think everyone has different fears, and different communities within our society have different fears. So, for example, refugees who might go back are afraid of different things to what refugees who might not go back are afraid of. Who are afraid and hope for different things from families of the missing, who are afraid and hope for different things from people in Bafos who have, very little interaction with the day-to-day reality of a divided country. So it's not just a 50-50 split. It's a multitude of confusions, fears, silences and uncertainties within both communities about the future, what we want, based on fears that are very different about the past and how that might play out in the future. So we need to start there.
Do you think, since we haven't started there yet, that it's even remotely plausible for the two leaders to say that they hope to have what they have agreed on as a solution ready by the end of the year? Because even if they do come out with a package, unless we do what you've been suggesting, there's no way that it's going to pass through a referendum, is it?
I think there is one thing in our favour, and that's the size of the country. We are a small country comparatively. So if, for example, the leaders were to start consultations and conversations at the community levels, at the town levels with people, and most importantly to hear people first before speaking to people, those conversations can start relatively quickly. They'll be uncomfortable, I guarantee it. They'll be uncomfortable for the leadership to start with, but it's the only way of earning trust from people. And what we should look at that's been interesting is the Colombian process, where they've had many years of consultations with all of the different communities in the country to build this relationship of trust. Now, if we are to do work of building trust between leaders and their communities, we do need to start thinking about that sooner rather than later. But given the size of the country, I don't know that that's an overwhelming task. I really don't. I think that it's possible if the strategies are clear and right.
Are you hopeful? Do you want to be hopeful?
I would like to be hopeful, and I know that the negotiators and the leaders are sympathetic to the idea and sensitive to the idea of sharing with communities what the future that they're working on might look like. But I also think that they are paralysed maybe by fear of those communities, but also by the sense maybe of overwhelm. And, you know, there is so much to do, where do we start? But I guess the lesson is you start now, today.
And that is Dr. Christalla Iakintou, who was speaking last week in Nicosia. She gave a talk at the CVAR entitled When Not All Roads Lead to Home, the Multiple Routes to Reconciliation.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
A new children's book was launched last night at the Bank of Cyprus Cultural Foundation in Nicosia. It's called Mary and the White Pea. At the moment it's only available in Greek, but hopefully that is going to change. It was written by primary school teacher Dimitra Sokratou, who joins us now. Dimitra, who is Mary and what is the white pea?
Actually, I can't really share what's the white pea exactly in the book, but Mary is a little girl, and she has a white pea in her head, and that's a symbolic language in the story, saying that Mary, she has a brain cancer, brain tumor, but it's her own way and her friend's way to find out what's inside her head, to understand what is cancer, and to deal with it in a playful way, in a different way, not in a way full of fear or anger. So Mary is a little girl, she's very brave, exactly at the time when everybody will expect from Mary to stop challenging herself. She starts the longer trip of her life to meet her own white pea and understand what is this and why it's there in her head. So all over through her journey, she finds out more about herself, her strength, her abilities, her desires, her targets. So finally, if she meets the white pea, we'll see what the relationship of them
What
will become.
made you write a book about a child with cancer?
Everybody asks me about this. It's the main question. I have to say that I'm writing since 2001, and also I've been dealing with some cancer issues with some of my family members and some of my friends. So it was not a topic very away from me. It was inside my life for the last 15 years, almost 15 years. So after an experience with a very close friend of mine, I felt like I had to deal with this, with cancer inside me, but in a different way, not with a serious adult way. So the story came up through me easily. when this friend of mine, she had to be operated, to have a surgery, another friend of us, she was a nurse, and she was with her inside the surgery room. So when the surgery finished, when she came outside, she just told us, guys, it was nothing, it was just a white pea. So, I mean, for me, I just saw it there. It was a white pea, it was not cancer, it was not black, it was not evil, it was just a white pea. So, I mean, after a week, I already had the story. And many of the characters of the story of Mary and the White Pea are my friends. I mean, the people who dealt with this experience, this specific experience, that time.
But the book is aimed at children, isn't it?
Yes,
so
yes.
Your experience as a primary school teacher must have given you an insight into, I'm sure you've possibly had children in your classes who are dealing themselves with cancer in the family or even possibly themselves.
Yes, of course. That was the second reason. I mean, after my own desire to deal with it in a more playful and explorative way. The other reason to write this kind of book on this special topic, that it's a very difficult topic on children's literature, it was because many times in my life, I needed to explain to children what is cancer, either about their family members' issues or about themselves. I didn't have students of mine, but I had children in my environment. I mean, their parents or their family, they were asking me to approach the child and explain them what is cancer and what is happening to them. So I've been in a very difficult position many times. But what I understood is that children, they don't really need all this information. What they need, and I really tried to put inside my story, is encouragement. They need encouragement, they need to accept the challenge, to be powerful, to be positive, to have hope, faith, and much patience to overcome this huge experience of life.
I would suggest that maybe 20 years ago, you wouldn't have written this book because people here never even spoke about cancer.
Yes. That's another of the main goals of the book, to make people talk about cancer. It's true that, I mean, in children's literature, there are, I mean, maybe 3 or 4 books dealing with cancer, and it's more in Greece. So I was really aware of this effort, and I have to admit that I accepted the challenge for myself, and I felt like it was time to have a book on this topic.
Is it going to be given? I think it is going to be given to our schools. So what sort of age group will be reading this in primary school in Cyprus?
Okay, I'm saying that it's targeting children from 8 to 15 years old. But actually, my students, they are 6 or 7 years old, and they've been reading it. And even older people, for example, grandparents or even parents, they can read it and feel that they can accept Mary's experience. It's not a book that it's only for children. I could say that it's a book for everybody.
But it is going into schools as part of the curriculum of literature?
No, not yet. It's been accepted by the Ministry of Education and Culture that if a school wants to have it, then it's fine to have it. There's a legal kind of license on this. But okay, who knows in the future? I think that it could take time until it gets into the curriculum or anything else.
We should add that it's got great illustrations as well by Dr. Stella Karagiorgi, who is also very much involved in art and history of art. And since it has been approved by the Ministry of Education to be distributed in schools, I think you're also giving it to various charities and non-profit organisations that work with children or deal with these issues. Who's funding that?
Actually, nobody. I'm trying to do it, and it's really hard. Because in the beginning, I was very enthusiastic about this idea of sharing my story with other people. So up to now, I shared something like more than 400 books, and it's getting tough because organizations and people, they are really interested in the book. So in the last few weeks, I tried to ask from companies or organizations if they would like to support my own effort to share the book with people or organizations.
So you're
We'll
looking really
see.
for a sponsor.
Yes.
How many did you print? Are you going to do a reprint?
If it's needed, yes. But at the moment, I think it's fine. I mean, we could go on with this.
Do you have a website, or is it up on Facebook or somewhere where people can search for Mary and the White Pea if they're interested in maybe trying to help out some way?
Yes, it's only in Facebook at the moment. I hope that I'll have a website soon. It's just because it's also a self-publication. I choose this way to make publicity of my own story. Because in the beginning I thought that asking from a publishing house to publish a book about about cancer, it could be maybe more difficult. So I decided that I needed to proceed.
So where can people buy a copy if they'd like to get hold of it?
They can find it in all the cities: Paphos, Limassol, Nicosia and Larnaca. In specific bookshops. It's not distributed in all the bookshops.
Or
And
they
also
can contact you,
by
I
me.
suppose, on Facebook.
Yes, on Facebook or on a telephone number.
Which is?
If I can share it.
Yeah.
It's 96219921.
That is Dimitra Socrates, the author of Mary and the White Pea, or I Mary και το λευκό πιζέλι. That's Mary and the White Pea. Have a look out for it. And its cost?
It's €12. And I could say that people, I mean, even with buying the book, they are also supporting me to continue this effort of sharing more copies of the book to people that they need it.
Get in touch with the Cyprus News Digest by emailing cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
Patrick Klein works at DG Grow at the European Commission. He was in Cyprus recently for a workshop on entrepreneurship and social enterprises. When I met him, I asked him first to explain the work of DG Grow.
DG Grow, we are working on internal market issue, SME development, entrepreneurship. It's a new DG, which has been created 1 year ago with the merge of DG Enterprise and DG Internal Markets. So this is what we are doing. In fact, free circulation, free movement of goods, services, stimulation of and development of SMEs and many other things.
And here in Cyprus at this particular workshop, you're dealing with social enterprise.
Yes.
And so how does that fit in? Because it's a very different thing from a for-profit business, isn't it?
Yes, it is. In our DG, we have a dedicated team on social economy, and in social economy, we're working as well on developing social enterprise in Europe. So yes, it is quite different. We have seen that social enterprises are having many problems to get developed in member states. That's why we are working on stimulating access to finance for them, improving their visibility, and developing kind of a legal framework. And this is the reason why I am here today in Cyprus in this workshop, is to work and to explain to our colleague here in Cyprus what's happening in different member states in order to develop a legal framework for social enterprises.
And of course, the two separate areas can work together if CSR is strong, but there doesn't seem in Cyprus to be a great deal of corporate social responsibility. But if there were, that would help the social enterprise sector to grow, wouldn't it?
Well, we have to be very careful, because when we are talking about social enterprise and CSR, these are two different things. Of course, if you have, a company which has a strong CSR, it can help. But CSR is not directly linked to social enterprises. There is a kind of concept of social enterprise that has been developed through the Social Business Initiative, which was launched by Commissioner Barnier in 2011, where you see what the European Commission called a social enterprise. So a social enterprise must trade must sell goods and services. A social enterprise has particularities, especially in the ownership of the company, governance, democratic principle, and so on. So this is what we try to stimulate. And of course, if you have CSR, this can be something that can be added. But this is not the core element where I can define a social enterprise.
And it does seem that we don't have a proper definition of a social enterprise.
You have, a definition which is, on the social business initiative, but as well, you have different approaches in the member states as regard social enterprise. For example, social enterprises can take the legal form of a cooperative, of an association, of a foundation, and can take, for example, commercial form like LTD, provided that they fulfill, some specific criteria.
And the specific criteria really is to be an enterprise that helps the wider community or a section of it.
Social impact. This is really, the term that is really important. If I had to really to summarize into words, the company needs to have, a social impact, and this is how we, as a Commission, we see, the social enterprise. And the legal form is important, but the target of the company is important. And if we see that the company is really focusing on social impact, for us, this is an important element.
How can you ensure that a company that sets out to be a social enterprise, perhaps even becomes quite well known as a social enterprise, sticks with those principles over time?
Well, what is important is that the Commission and Member States have to take care of the situation. The Commission cannot be responsible for everything. So we, in the Commission, we are working with Member States in order to set up some public policies for them to get developed. And after that, for example, let's use, one public policy that has been developed those last year. I'm talking about public procurement, for example. There is now a clear rules that we need to stimulate social consideration in procurement by Member States. So it's up to the Member States to implement these rules in the public area and then to define how they want to, for example, create public tenders that will attract social enterprise to answer to specific needs. So we leave it sometimes to Member States to that. The Commission is not going to say this is a social enterprise or this is not a social enterprise. What we have in the Social Business Initiative from 2011 is really, some key concept when we say this is a social enterprise or this is not a social enterprise. But after that, we are working hand in hand with Member States in order to develop this concept. It's not a top-down approach.
Right, and governments, of course, would benefit from ensuring that at least a percentage of public procurement went to social enterprises, because I'm presuming that the impact social enterprises can have on government budgets, for example, because they're very often covering needy areas where there are government shortfalls, the two could work very closely in tandem, couldn't they?
Yes, and let me give you just, for example, one example, what we are doing, on the European side. From 2014 until 2020, we have now what we call the European Structural Fund that really dedicated a certain amount of money. I think that more than 1 billion euro for the European Social Fund and around 500 or 400 million euro for the European Regional Development Fund. These are all the funds that are allocated, for member states to develop specific program to stimulate the development of social enterprises. So and now it's up to the member states to implement those kind of program, and of course for social enterprises or for business services that help social enterprise to get developed to take advantages of this financial envelope.
Patrick Lyon from the European Commission talking there about a roundtable workshop on social enterprise in Cyprus. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.